So I could see after having talked to Aaron why you're so enthusiastic about his book, and fascinating interview. His book, The Table of Contents, you've read it and love it. I have not read it. I've skimmed it, but just the table of contents make me excited about reading it. And I think the people will really enjoy this interview. He's a fascinating young man, and he's very humble as well. What did you think?
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was one of the best treatments of the subject that I have read, and I highly recommend it. I think it would be great for high school students and youth pastors, youth leaders, parents who are concerned about the topic or interested in knowing more. So it was really good. And I enjoyed just getting to know him. I like how personalities come through in writing and in the written word. But it's so exciting to meet a person and hear their personal journey and their story, and have a flavor of how that came out into their book. So I enjoyed the interview for sure. Joining us today is Aaron Yilmaz, a PhD candidate who is currently an adjunct professor teaching evolutionary biology at the university level. His research focuses on urban evolution, and he has published several evolutionary biology related journals. His book, Deliver Us from Evolution, has sold several thousand copies worldwide and explores the evolution debate from a Christian perspective. Thank you for joining us today, Aaron Yilmaz. Yeah, tell us a little bit about your background. Who are you? For our listeners who've never heard of you and your really fantastic book that I can't recommend highly enough. What's your background, spiritual, academic? Just tell us more.
Yeah, I guess spiritually, I was kind of raised in a nominal Christian home. Went to church a couple times, celebrated Easter, Christmas. It wasn't until I was about 15, I was in like an existential funk trying to figure out, is there any meaning to my life, So I picked up a little book by Thomas Nagel called What Does It All Mean? He was a professor of philosophy at NYU. And, I was naive enough to think at 15 that like a 90-page book is going to tell me the meaning of life. So I read it. And at the end, he says, there is no meaning. You're going to die, and in 100 years, going to be grown over with grass, and no one's going to ever know you existed. There's no point to anything. And, it sent like a visceral, like literal shock through my body. And it kind of started me on this search for, I got to figure out, is this true? Is there no God? Is there an afterlife? So long story short, I started, investigating different religions. I started attending a, local church around the same time. And by the time I was 16, I became convinced that this was the most plausible worldview, the biblical Christian worldview. And so, just became a Christian, and that's, kind of been ever since. It's, kind of the story. Academically, it's a little bit different. I didn't really take school seriously. I took gym 7 times. I took home ec like twice, keyboarding. I took auto shop like half the year, my junior and senior year. I just screwed off a lot and like didn't really care. Had a bunch of different jobs. I drove a forklift. I worked as a cable guy, wildland firefighter, worked in a high-rise insurance stuff. And I quit my job, making decent money at the time, to go clean toilets at a nature center for about $8,000 a year. And my wife, who was my fiance at the time, was supportive, but, obviously worried because she wanted to get married. But I got a job at the nature center. Eventually, after cleaning toilets, I had a naturalist position open up. And my boss said, usually you have to have a bachelor's degree, but, we'll let you become a naturalist on the condition you go back to school. So I, started going to school for a bachelor's in biology, graduated, wanted to do wildlife stuff, applied to like 200 jobs all over the country, flew out using student loan money, didn't get any jobs. I said, you need more experience, more education, more experience. So I ended up getting my master's degree in biology. So I went back to the same job. Well, you were underqualified last time. Now you're overqualified. So long story short, I was doing some wildlife stuff in Florida, and my wife was taking classes for her nursing degree. And the professor found out I had a biology degree. He said, hey, your husband should apply here. He can be an adjunct. And I never thought about it, but I applied and I started teaching some biology classes, and I just absolutely fell in love with that, especially the aspect of, teaching students. So kind of at them, I had found out about some interest going on in England from one of my mentors, kind of this urban evolution aspect. So I inquired to him, we started talking, and he offered me a paid PhD position in his lab. And so now I'm a PhD candidate, about halfway through my PhD. Published a few good papers, first author. I'm teaching adjunct at the University of Akron right now, evolutionary biology class. And just, looking forward to hopefully teaching evolutionary biology and trying to, kind of bridge that gap.
So I'm curious about the urban evolution. Is this stuff like squirrels and crows making their home in cities and adapting, that type of thing? Tell me more.
Yeah, there's been some neat research on those kinds of things, like, bird feeders in urban areas. Like, some populations of birds are actually evolving, to more efficiently feed off bird feeders that people are putting out. My main thing is, mostly arthropods. So I did a paper on ants. I looked at body size across 3 cities, urban-rural gradients. But mostly my stock and trade is isopods. So like pill bugs or roly-polies you find under like stones and logs. So I study wood lice. So essentially I go out, I, capture a bunch. I put them in a glorified refrigerator for, several months, and I rear up thousands of them, and I do torturous experiments. I heat them up till they die. I freeze them till they die. Expose them to pollution till they die. And basically what I'm looking at is, they're in an urban environment. They were here first. We built a city around them. We jacked up the temperature. We added a lot of pollution. It's a lot drier here. So how do they adapt to all these different challenges? And so there's a lot of different selective challenges. How do they adapt to them? Do they increase their ability to withstand heat to the detriment of ability to withstand desiccation? Do these traits evolve in concert? So it's pretty much what I study at this point.
Wow. Can you tell us some of your preliminary conclusions?
Yeah, so I have a paper. It's already posted online, but I think it's actually going to come out in the first journal of the next year. So just a paper with my advisors in evolutionary applications, which I present findings that show evidence that urban populations of isopods in Cleveland have actually evolved to withstand more heat. Because, in urban Cleveland here, it's about 3 degrees C warmer than the adjacent rural areas. And so I showed, pretty good evidence that they've actually evolved to withstand more heat in the city. So this is evolution on, human beings, lifetime. Like on our contemporary time scale, we actually see populations evolving in response to, the pressures of urban living, which I think is just super cool.
All right. So you have this book that you wrote, Deliver Us from Evolution or perhaps Evolution. What led to writing this?
Yeah, I wish there was. I wish I had a better answer other than I was angry. I had so many people that pastors, apologists, Christian friends. They kept telling me how evolution's fraud and evolution's all fabricated, and this is something I had studied pretty in depth. This is something I've devoted a lot of time and energy to. And so, I got upset that there was so much misinformation about evolution, and that so many people had bought into this idea that there's this, dichotomy. It's you choose either evolution and atheism, or you can choose, Christianity and some form of creationism or intelligent design. And so I wanted to set the record straight. I hadn't seen a book out there that had really hard evidence from evolutionary biology and also kind of the spiritual, philosophical side. So I got pretty mad about it, and I spent 2.5 years just pounding it out.
You did a great job too. And I actually am really happy to see a lot more books and resources on this subject are available now than in the past. So sure. Why don't we kind of dig into your book? John, did you have a question first?
Yeah. Can we start with the title? Yeah, what made you choose that title? Were you being provocative, or tell us a little bit more about that?
It'd be a little provocative because, I think evolution is seen by a lot of Christians and, myself for a long time is something to be feared or something to be, derided or put down. And so, I kind of pose the question, deliver us from evolution. Should we be delivered from it? Is it a hoax? Is it dangerous to faith? Or is there good evidence that, this is actually true? So I didn't want to put people off too much with a title that gave it away. I wanted to try to draw people in, and hopefully by exploring the book, wherever they're at, they would hopefully get something from it, and hopefully it would spur some thinking.
Sometimes people won't go in and start reading a book if they already know it's a view different than their own, which is kind of too bad. I think it's good to be aware of positions outside your own. But I think the book is title is kind of clever. And in it, you talk both about evolution and evidence about the age of the earth. Why don't we start with the age of the earth question? Tell us some of the best evidences you have found for why scientists, by and large, conclude that Earth is billions of years old.
A lot of these polls are showing that over 99% of working PhD scientists agree that the Earth is, 4.54 billion years old. But if you ask the general public, some polls have shown upwards of 50%. If you ask them, do you believe humans and the entire universe created within the last 10,000 years? Some polls show upwards of 50% of the public will agree with that statement. So it's possible that half the people believe in a young Earth. And it's kind of inconceivable when, I try to objectively assess the evidence. I meant, looking at the stars in your backyard at night. When you look at the stars with the naked eye, you can see stars 2.6 million light years away. So obviously, if the Earth has only been here for 6,000 years or 10,000 even, it's hard to imagine how we've had light rays traveling for 2.6 million years. With the telescope, you can see, lights, stars rather, 2 billion years away. And then a telling of young Earth creationism that, they have to pretty much have an entirely radically different view of the universe just to explain how you can see stars at night. They have to invoke, something like time dilation or, the speed of light was, way faster, which that wouldn't work because either, so much energy is, put off that the Earth is vaporized or, we don't have any gravity. You can't really change the E equals MC squared equation much with things going really wrong. I guess what you're left with is maybe the appearance of age, right? So 6,000 years ago, God created the Earth to look 4.5 billion years old with rays already in place from stars that never existed. It seems a little duplicitous, and that seems like kind of a deceptive God. But it gets even more complicated when you think about something like the 1987 A supernova. So in 1987, scientists, look through their telescopes and they see a supernova 170,000 light years away, which means that 170,000 years ago, the star blew up, and it's taken 170,000 years for this light ray to reach the scientist telescope. Well, if the universe was created 6 or 10,000 years ago, that means that 6 or 10,000 years ago, God created a light ray already in place that he knew would show a supernova that in reality never even existed. He created a light ray that would show a fake supernova that never even existed. So I just have a hard time believing that God is that duplicitous or is that intent on misleading scientists. I think some other really good evidences for the age of the Earth. Ice cores. Ice cores, static areas of glaciers, you get, kind of a freeze. I'm sorry, not a freeze thaw, but through, radiation and, different temperature conditions, you get like a light and dark band every year. And so we have great evidence from ice cores that the Earth is at least 800,000 years old. The Vostok ice core is like 450,000 of these annual layers. The Dome C? The Dome C ice core has 800,000 of these layers. And so it's pretty hard to explain on a young Earth model. Of course, what they would say is, these rates of phenomena are accelerated in the past, and they slammed us once you started looking at them. And you think, well, maybe, but then you look at stalactites, right? Stalactites grow about half an inch. I'm sorry, not half an inch. Sorry, I have my notes up here somewhere. About 0.1 millimeter per year. So it's like growing about 0.1 millimeters per year. Some of them are 27 foot long. So, I mean, you do the math, we know that these stalactites have been hanging around, intended, for 57,000 years at least. When you think about moon dust, we know the rate of dust deposition on the moon, and there's about 2 inches of dust on the moon. So we know that about 2 nanograms per centimeter accumulate on the moon. You multiply that by 4.5 billion years, you get exactly 2 inches. VARV. So this is like the Green River Formation out west. VARVs are kind of the same as like the ice cores. Every year, due to differences in sediment and differences in water levels, you get these 2 layers, kind of a light and dark band. And so what you get is you get these annual layers. Well, how many annual layers do we see? Depending on the VARV formation, we see anywhere from 4.5 to 20 million. And again, creationists want to say, well, those aren't annual layers. Those were, these hyper accelerated phenomena way back before we started looking at them. And so you'd have to imagine, about 900 storms a year to create what appears to be just an annual layer. And even more so, within these annual layers, you see bird nests, you see eggs, you see feces, you see nestlings. So it's hard to imagine that birds did all that in, about 8 hours in one day. Not only that, but, these VARVs, not only can we count the annual layers, they also line up with, radiometric dating on them. So they've been dated radiometrically. It shows that, yes, these are actual annual layers. I could just go on and on. I don't know how much you want me to.
But Aaron, I want to jump in it for a second here and ask you, because we kind of moved past it quickly. When you were 16 and you said that you accepted that the Christian argument was valid and probably the most probable, were you aware of young Earth creation? Were you aware that there was this swath of Christians who took the Bible, or at least Genesis, to be literal history and science? Were you aware of that? Or what path did you travel until you became aware that and grew tired of Christians being skeptical about science and evolution? Yeah. When I became a Christian when I was 16, I hadn't really thought about it much. I just kind of assumed the Earth was old. I was really undecided about, evolution. And when I became a new Christian, I started reading everything I could, a lot of apologetics, and there are many influential apologetics books today. I won't name any names, Lee Strobel, Norman Geisler. But a lot of these books, as great as they were in helping me, come to faith, they also put up a lot of. Thank you for that. But back to our normal programming. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, as influential and as helpful as they were in, matters of, faith, they also put up a serious stumbling block because, when I was reading these books as a young Christian, they're essentially saying, well, if evolution is true, there's no meaningful role for God. There's no room for God if evolution is true. And they, to me, pitch this, kind of dichotomy of, well, you're a Christian now, you can either choose, Jesus and some form of creationism or intelligent design, or you can choose to accept evolution and you can be an atheist. And so as a new Christian, I thought, well, I love Jesus, I'm a Christian now. Well, I guess I have to accept some stripe of creationism or intelligent design. And so I did for a long time, and I was hostile to evolutionary biology. I looked up everything I could and read all these, books by mostly old Earth creationists and intelligent design proponents. And I would actually argue against people who accepted evolutionary biology. A lot of times I won. I knew more than they did about the counter arguments and the actual science. But I think things changed when it was like my junior or senior year in my of my degree. I took an evolutionary biology class at the university level, and I thought, well, this is a great opportunity. I'm going to infiltrate. I'm going to learn everything there is to know. I'm going to expose them
I'm going to bring the whole thing down by infiltrating it, learning all the secrets. I can really take it down. And I found myself about a third halfway through the class thinking, wow, this is something, my books never told me about. My apologetics books, really misconstrued this. So they, kind of suppressed this evidence. And so really for the first time, I wasn't trusting what apologists and, radio show hosts were telling me. I was actually looking at the raw data myself. And, someone who's being trained in science, I started looking at the data and I thought, well, this has a lot of explanatory power and scope. And I'm not really sure how to fit this in with my Christian worldview yet, but I know that, God gave me a brain and I'm using it. And this really seems to make a lot of sense and explain a lot of the data.
Let's peel back on that a little bit. When we've heard deconversion testimonies of famous people or even non-famous people, but I'm thinking of Rhett and Link from Good Mythical Morning. When they talk about their deconstruction, Rhett said that he didn't blame his youth pastor or his church because they didn't know any better, basically. But he did blame the people who wrote the books. And following up on what you just said about famous apologists, Kristine and I have talked about how it just seems like the majority of apologists today have an anti-evolutionary stance, and it's really unnecessary. Yeah. It's completely not only wrong-headed, but it's unnecessary. And yet it seems to be a string on each of their guitars. So how big of it was it? How big of a move was it for you to be able to say, wow, I'm not just going to trust these guys anymore. I'm going to think on my own. Number one, the first part of the question. Second part of the question is, did that make you think that maybe you were wrong as a 16-year-old and maybe you need to rethink your faith? Because if these are the giants of the faith and they're saying it's either or, did you have any second thoughts on that, or did you automatically just say, wow, they're wrong, I have to think about this myself?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, you pretty much summed it up perfectly. Yeah, I read these books, and these are books that had partially convinced me that the gospel is reliable, and that the Christian worldview is grounded in history and philosophically, logically sound. And part and parcel of that was also the anti-evolution rhetoric. And so, fast forward to my college years, when I find out that the evolution piece, they actually got it wrong. I mean, that's exactly what I was thinking. I was thinking, well, they got it so wrong with evolution. They couldn't have gotten it more wrong. Or were they wrong about Jesus too? And so, yeah, I mean, that fueled a lot of my anger in writing the book because I felt like they really did set me up for, a big crisis of faith. They had put the evolution kind of as a package deal with being a Christian. When I found out they were wrong about evolution, I thought, well, what else are they wrong about? Are they wrong about Jesus too? And so, yeah, I kind of had to go back and, well, I'm not going to trust anybody anymore. I'm doing my own research on everything. And so that was a real eye-opener for me. It was a tough time, and I was newly married at this point. I spent a lot of long nights with my wife at the dinner table talking about this and how do I possibly reconcile my biblical worldview with this idea of, evolution and common descent. And it was not easy. And, at some part I do blame myself for not being more diligent and being a little naive and just trusting, that some popular level lawyer is going to tell me the truth about evolutionary biology. But, I do put some of the blame on them too. I mean, they have a big responsibility. Some of the people I mentioned, they have a huge voice or did have a huge voice. And, when they're a little bit reckless and talking about areas that are not their expertise or, areas they have not studied in depth, I mean, that's kind of a recipe for disaster in my book.
When you're coming out of that moment where you're feeling that frustration, did you find yourself exposed to any resources that helped you, or was this your own study? Did you bump into somebody and said, hey, check out Biologist, or was that not available to you at the time? Tell us about that transition from the initial anger to being at peace and then maybe being inspired to write the book.
Yeah, so at the time, I really not aware that there was even this pretty large middle ground. According to the polls, I mean, people who attend religious services weekly, upwards of 40% say they accept evolution. I had no idea this middle ground existed. I was just pitched, and I cut my teeth on this literature that says, it's either evolution and atheism or it's Christianity and some form of creationism. So, I was pretty distraught, and one night I'm just flipping through the TV, just kind of trying to get my mind off the whole thing, and I actually see Dinesh D'Souza and John Polky in an atheist Christianity debate, and I'm watching it. I think it's interesting, and the atheists actually bring up the charge of, Christians deny science, so on and so forth. And Dinesh D'Souza actually laid out something I'd never heard, that evolution and Biblian coexist. And I was elated. I had never heard of such a thing, and I didn't even know the possibility existed. But here was this guy who was obviously a very intelligent Christian who was articulating this position that you can accept science, go where the evidence leads you. You can follow God's revealed truth and His revealed word. So I bought his book, What's So Great About Christianity. That turned me on to some other key figures in this field, like Francis Collins, Kenneth Miller, John Walton. And so, I ended up finding this whole new community of people who, are rigorous scientists who respect, God revealing Himself in nature, and also respect God's words and consider them, devout Christians.
Yeah, I've actually read a few of Dinesh D'Souza's books as well, early in my exploration, struggling through this topic as well. And I liked a lot of what he had to say. It was kind of thoughtful, different thoughts than I had been exposed to before. So my background is that I attended a Christian high school that was very fundamentalist Baptist, young earth creation. And it wasn't from my family of origin, but just from the school environment that I kind of picked up this young earth creation perspective. Not really dogmatically, but I just didn't know anything different. I just assumed that's how things were. And then I went into aerospace engineering and, kind of eventually learned that what I had been taught there didn't really match up to what I was seeing in the real world around me. And with not having a very strong biology background, it took me a while to kind of plow through biology and evolution, and I just didn't know what to think for a long time. For me, one of the aspects of evolution that was very compelling was biogeography and the way different animals evolved in different environments, and you could kind of trace these back over geography. And that to me was very telling, if there was like this intelligent design, miraculous creation sporadically around the world, that wouldn't be an unexpected pattern. So tell us some of the factors for you that were really compelling to promote evolution that do not fit well with an intelligent designer or spontaneous creation type of a viewpoint.
I think you touched upon one of the biggest ones. I mean, Jerry Coyne, who's a famous, biologist, he says essentially that, biogeography is such powerful evidence for evolution that he said he hasn't seen any creationist lecture, any creationist book, or any creationist literature that's even discussed biogeography. They just pretend it doesn't exist because it's so, such persuasive evidence. And you think, why did great polar bears and the Arctic, and there's an identical habitat in Antarctica where they don't live? Why are penguins in the Antarctic and not the Arctic, even though it's an identical environment? Why do you have cacti in the Americas, but somehow in the identical environment in the Middle East, right in Noah's backyard, they never got established? Why does Madagascar have 100 species of lemur and there's no other species of lemur anywhere else on Earth? Why does Australia have all the marsupials except for, a few opossums in the Americas? Why do islands not really have any native salamanders, amphibians, fishes, freshwater fishes rather? And so, a lot of these facts don't seem to fit with, this creation model of either independent centers of creation or dispersal from, Mount Ararat or wherever the ark landed. Much better, evolutionary biology model where, you have dispersal and vicariance and these things that have such explanatory scope and power to explain why we have this distribution of animals the way we do. Even Darwin noticed this. Darwin was, in the Galapagos, he found these giant tortoises up to 6 foot long, size of almost the size of Volkswagen Beetle. And, he saw the Chaco tortoise on the South American mainland. And obviously he hypothesized that, they dispersed over there, rafted on there in some vegetation. They colonized these islands. And even on the islands, these tortoises are all huge, but they have different shaped shells depending on the selective pressures on each island. He found fossils of glyptodonts, which are, these giant shelled creatures that are, prehistoric. And he found, modern armadillos, in the same spot he found the fossils of the ancient glyptodonts. So they look very similar, but they're different in many ways. Biogeography, I think, is something that even impressed Darwin, and he wrote a whole chapter on it. So I think that is persuasive evidence for evolution. I would say if I was pressed to pick maybe one or two pieces of evidence, I think one to me that stands out is human chromosome 2. So, if we do share common ancestry with the great apes, so, science tells us that our closest relatives are the chimpanzees, followed by the gorillas and the orangutans. Well, there's a problem, or at least on the surface there seems to be a problem. The great apes all have 24 chromosome pairs. Humans have 23 chromosome pairs. And I would say that presents a problem because it seems very unlikely that we would have lost an entire chromosome during our evolution and we would have still survived as a species. And it seems equally improbable that orangs, chimps, and gorillas would have independently evolved an extra chromosome. That would seem to be the end of them as well. But then, in 2005, we get a peek inside the human genome and we have, all the great ape genome sequenced. And we look at our chromosome 2, and what do we find? Well, on a normal chromosome, you have telomeres on the end. So the ends of the chromosome have these very repetitive, specific sequences of DNA that are like caps on the chromosome. You only find them on the ends. We also have this region of DNA in the middle of the chromosome called a centromere. And so that's, important for cell division events. Find them in the center. So, here's a testable hypothesis, right? If this chromosome fused, we had 24, a chromosome fused, now we have 23, we should be able to look at that chromosome and see telomeres in the middle and centromeres not quite in the middle, but maybe a third and 2/3 of the way down. Well, that's exactly what we see. We see a chromosome, an extra long chromosome, right? Twice the length of chimpanzee chromosome 2A and 2B. And in the middle of the chromosome, we see telomeres. We see end caps in the middle of the chromosome. And then instead of having one centromere in the middle, we have one centromere about a third of the way down and another centromere about 2/3 of the way down. And so I'm hard-pressed to find any explanation rather than common assent for why we would possibly have a fused chimpanzee genome, or chimpanzee chromosome essentially in our genome. So that to me is really powerful.
Aaron, if the evidence is so strong, and the example you just gave is very compelling, I think that's too what changed Dennis Venema's mind. What made him leave intelligent design for evolutionary creation was the chimpanzee and the human genome. But if the evidence is so strong, why do Christians hate evolution? As you write in your book, chapter.
Yeah, I think part of that is the fault of a very vocal minority of scientists, and I think part of it is also the fault of a very vocal minority of Christians. When you have people like Richard Lewontin saying, in science we can't allow a divine foot in the door, or you have people like Richard Dawkins saying about religious people, mock them, ridicule them in public, that obviously doesn't build much goodwill with Christians. And so even when I hear Richard Dawkins, which I know he's, a brilliant evolutionary biologist, but when he says things about philosophy and religion, which is not his expertise, I'm sometimes shocked, and it makes me want to reject not only him, but, the science that he stands for and, purports to teach. And so I think a lot of Christians do that too. I think they have this idea that, there's kind of a scientific conspiracy that scientists, hate Christianity, what they want to promote atheism, and the vehicle to do that is through, the teaching of evolution. But I also think there's, blame to be put on a lot of conservative Christians. Obviously there's a lot of authors, pastors, apologists who, they're imperfectly equipped freelancers who haven't really studied these things in depth, are relying on other people's work who sometimes is also really shoddy. And they're kind of pontificating. They're spreading this idea that, this is the scientific consensus, but, they're wrong. They're just, they have all these ulterior motives. The science is not pure. You can't trust it. So I think there's blame to be put on, several different groups.
What do you think is the most misunderstood about evolution?
There's so many. I could drone on forever, but one that really bothers me is this idea of this hopeful monster kind of speciation, where within a generation you have like a new species arise. I used to listen to a radio talk show host of Metro Detroit. I won't give him any press by saying his name, but he used to say, think about it, folks. If monkeys gave rise to humans, a monkey is on the savannah and a monkey gives birth to this human. Who does the human mate with? There are no other humans. There are only monkeys around. It used to drive me nuts. Like this idea that you have species A and then all of a sudden it gives birth to species B. Sometimes there can be a hopeful monster, like some plants may be able to speciate within a generation, but it's obviously not the norm. That's much the exception. So this idea that, individuals evolve and not populations, really it's populations that evolve and not individuals, but it seems to be lost on, most of the general public. Trying to think of other ones. I guess, the idea that evolution is like a straight line progression. We see like this horrible example from textbooks like 50 years ago where you have, kind of like some kind of, prosimian, and then you have, like an ape, and then you have like a caveman, and you have like the regular man. So this idea that people have that, there's this progression and A evolves into B, evolves into C, evolves into D, which, in reality, the tree of life is it's not even a tree, it's like a bush. There are so many different ends and side paths and offshoots. And we only have about 1/10 of all species that existed. So most of those have gone extinct. You talk about human evolution, we know of at least a dozen other species that didn't survive to the present day, and there are probably dozens more that we may not find or may take years to find. So this idea that there's like a straight line progression of species is just something that evolutionary biology does not support, but somehow is in the popular sphere.
Ben Stein has a famous documentary kind of proponent of intelligent design called Expelled, No Intelligence Allowed. You are in academia, you teach at a university. Is there a conspiracy to get people fired or to keep them out of certain areas of science, or would you call it more of a climate against pseudoscience? How would you answer Ben Stein and the martyr argument from Discovery Institute?
Yeah, that's funny. I remember, I was still, a young Christian, and I still, held to intelligent design and, some kind of form of creationism. I actually went and saw that in the theaters, and it blew me away. I thought it was great. I'm sorry. I lost track of that. What was the question?
That kind of puts forward this idea that people who think about intelligent design or who are proponents of it are an abused minority, that they have been targeted to, get them fired or keep them from getting tenure, or that they've got the secret truth that this cabal, this secularist cabal wants to keep down these neo-Darwinist bad guys. I'm asking you about the martyrdom complex that puts forward. Yeah. Is there a conspiracy to ruin these guys' lives, or do you think there's just a climate in academia that says this isn't real science?
Yeah.
Climate or conspiracy when it comes to ID in academia, in scientific circles?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, certainly in my experience, there's this, assumption that, Christianity is not allowed in, academia. And, I will have to say, when it's in academia, it's not something that's, really discussed much. It's not something that in my experience, find that many people are interested in. People know that I am a devout Christian. They know I go to church, read the Bible every day. But for the most part, they just don't really seem that interested in talking about it. In my experience, people may think it's, different or maybe even a little bit odd. But I've never experienced any outright, hostility or condescension. There is sometimes an undercurrent of maybe soft, not condemnation or ridicule, but sometimes there's this undercurrent of things like the Templeton Foundation, things like too closely aligned with Christianity, something like Biologist. Some of those are kind of, I don't know how to say, maybe poo-pooed. But, that's the great thing about science, that if you have data, and that data is, validly collected and, you can publish. So if you have data, you can publish. I mean, that's the problem with intelligent design. I mean, Kitzmiller versus Dover in 2005, essentially the court case that decided the teaching of intelligent design. I mean, at the end of the day, the judge essentially said, you can't teach intelligent design as science because you haven't published anything except in your own books and, your own special journals. If you have data, I mean, you can publish. So, I mean, there's not any anti-Christian bias. It's just a bias against things that are not testable hypotheses and that are not science. I mean, there is a bias against, assertions that are based only in religious beliefs and are not testable. And I get that because, the project of science is to look for, empirical data for observable phenomena. Not that there isn't anything outside of that. I mean, these religious suppositions may well be true, but science just can't speak to those issues. And so, to me, any attempt to try to bring, the sphere of, philosophy or religion into science, to me, it's just misconceived. You just, you're not going to get anywhere. You're going to get off the ground with non-testable hypotheses that are rooted in, religious convictions. Even those religious convictions may well be true. That's just, you've ceased to do science at that point. So I don't see a bias. I mean, in my personal experience, I'm a Christian. I think a good number of people know in my department, and I haven't experienced much maltreatment or anything. Maybe some curiosity, but.
Isn't Joel Duff also in your department?
Yeah. I guess when I was referring to department, I'm thinking Case Western, but yeah, at the University of Akron, when I, got the adjunct position, Joel Duff emailed me and he said, I saw you contributed in, an article to Biologist. I'm like, oh, Joel Duff. Like, I know who you are. And he's like, yeah, I teach evolutionary biology at Maine campus. I'm like, oh, cool. I'm at Wayne campus this semester, So it was kind of fun.
Yeah, that's neat. So I often hear Christians will say things like, microevolution can happen. That's just kind of adaptation, but not macroevolution. So what's wrong with this kind of thinking? What would be a better way to think about the terms microevolution and macroevolution?
Yeah, so, I hear this all the time. I hear, in creationist literature, it's like, well, microevolution, that's fine. That's change within a species, but there's a missing mechanism. You need to show us the missing mechanism that gets you from microevolution to macroevolution. And of course, the real question is, what mechanism would prevent microevolution from becoming macroevolution? Because there's a very good argument to be made that macroevolution and, microevolution are quantitatively different, but qualitatively the same. So I use the example all the time. I mean, if you walk, you can walk from your house to the corner store. But, saying that microevolution will not equal macroevolution is saying, well, you can walk from your house to the corner store, but you can't walk from your house to Fresno, California or Tallahassee, Florida. Naturally the question is, well, why not? I mean, won't the same process that gets me from my house to the corner store get me to Tallahassee or Fresno eventually? It may take a lot longer time, but if millimeters can add up to meters, why can't they add up to kilometers and maybe hundreds of kilometers? So I put the burden of proof back on the creationists and intelligent design proponents. I mean, show me a mechanism that can stop microevolution from becoming macroevolution, because, I don't see any reason to think that they're quantitatively different, but qualitatively the same.
Now, that's a good way to look at it. Why do you think so many apologists are anti-evolution? What's driving it? Do you think it's a financial thing? Do you think that they wouldn't get any speaking engagements if they supported evolution?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to psychoanalyze, but I mean, I think that that may be part of it. I know during the Kitzmiller versus Dover trials, Michael Behe from Lay University, who he wrote Darwin's Black Box. He's an intelligent design proponent. I remember when he made an admission on the stand that he accepted common ancestry with apes. I know that his intelligent design colleagues were not happy about it, and they were pretty blown away by that. So I think there is this sense that if you want to do apologetics and you want to be taken seriously by, devout Christians, you kind of have to toe that line, and you have to peddle some kind of intelligent design of some sort. I'm trying to think. What was the other part of the question? Sorry.
Yeah, that was pretty much it.
The suggestion that they're, Kristine, I don't have to be as generous as our guest. So I'm going to say yes. I'm going to say I'm disappointed too. I think part of it is what Aaron suggested from earlier. As you're coming up through evangelical circles, the majority of the resources are evolution or atheist. I mean, if you're an evolutionist, you're an atheist, then it's anti-God. So they have that coming up. But I think some of the people that you're talking about are smart enough to know the difference, and it's not like they're blind to people like Francis Collins and these other voices that have made it plain. But I don't think they'd be invited to too many conferences at evangelical churches because the evangelical churches that would invite them think that it's godless, and they're the ones going to the Ben Stein movies. So now I think the real question is then why aren't they just silent about it? Because it's not an integral part. It's not a tier 1 issue when it comes to evangelism, and it could be a tier 1 obstacle though. So why do they bother bashing it? And that to me is a tell that it's not naivete, that it's something it's willful and it's planned. Who was it who said the famous saying, it's hard to make a man understand something when his paycheck relies on him not understanding it? I think that's very true in these cases. With some people I won't name, Frank Turk, and the others. But it's really disappointing to me. There's a young group of evangelists or of apologists who accept evolutionary biology, and that is, I think, good. I almost believe that this generation is an Exodus generation, my generation, and we have to die in the wilderness. And because I don't think there's going to be any convincing grandma. And a lot of people are so steeped in this, and they're so invested in it being us against the atheists that they've circled the wagons, and they won't listen. They won't read Aaron's book because Aaron is part of the problem. He is, if he's not an apostate, he's a reprobate, or he's, what are the favorite words? Heretic.
I'm a shill.
And the slippery slope that you went on, Aaron, was having the audacity to go to university. And because you haven't you seen God's Not Dead? And you ended up,
unfortunately,
these secular professors sprinkle the fairy dust over you, and you turn into an atheist, and you're just calling yourself a Christian. Yeah. But so, I mean, this is the atmosphere, Kristine, and even the churches that we're familiar with. I mean, how many of them? Francis Collins is a big name, but I mean, I don't know how many people would invite him to speak. I really don't. I think they'd love the first half of his book and hate the second half.
Right. Well, and it's coming out of apologetics, like college
Biola?
teaching.
Go ahead and say it.
Biola is a good example. I mean, Biola, in their statement of faith, it has a commitment against evolution in their statement of faith. So anybody coming out of that program is going to be taught evolution is false, regardless of any evidence.
Yeah. And it's unfortunate too, because, like William Lane Craig is like one of my superheroes, but it's as close to idolatry as I can get without breaking one of the commandments. He's got 2 doctorates. I mean, obviously he's a brilliant guy. But I hear him talking about the Cambrian explosion and things like that. And instantly when I hear him talking, I know he's parroting from, Stephen C. Meyer's book. I mean, I can hear it word for word. Abdu Murray, who at least was the North American director for Ravi Zacharias and International Ministries, I kind of informally debated him in the lobby of a church once, and every word I could hear him saying was lifted straight out of Stephen C. Meyer's book. And so, a lot of really intelligent, top-notch apologists are really heavily relying on people like, Stephen C. Meyer and Michael Behe and all these other people, and really not doing their own research. Which obviously, I look at Stephen C. Meyer's book and I think, you talk about the Cambrian explosion. What was it? Darwin's Doubt. And, I just tear my hair out thinking about all the misinformation about the Cambrian explosion. I think, there are phyla of animal that came after the Cambrian. There were phyla of animal before the Cambrian, at least cnidarians and porphyrians, possibly several other phyla. Land plants were hundreds of millions of years away from the Cambrian. Fungi weren't even there yet. And yet he presents the Cambrian as, Earth was dead and lifeless, and all of a sudden, at midnight, 543 million years ago, just oodles of critters explode into the universe. And, the truth is the Cambrian explosion lasted like 25 million years, even 10 million by very conservative estimates.
Yeah.
And we see transitional fossils within the Cambrian explosion. And, so I think about Stephen C. Meyer, and I think must be suppression of evidence. I want to give him the benefit of the doubt, but at the level he's at, it's hard for me to give him the benefit of the doubt and not just conclude that he's in the evidence. And I think, the biggest difference I see between myself and, intelligent design and creationism is, I'm a scientist. I look at the data and I say, what does the data tell me? What conclusions can I draw from this data? But I think a lot of apologists and pastors and, intelligent design creationists, I think what they do is they say, well, I have the conclusion and, I need to find whatever support that. You look at the Ken Ham-Bill Nye debate. I mean, Ken Ham essentially said as much. He said, yeah, I admit, I start from the Bible. That's where I start from. No one's going to convince me otherwise. I start from the Bible. And essentially, I find what will fit that. And obviously, that's not the way we do science.
Yeah. That's one of the things I noticed in Jason Lyle was Ken Ham's partner in a John Ankerberg debate with against Hugh Ross and Walter Kaiser. And Jason Lyle said, I start my study of astronomy with the Bible. And I contrast that with what Mary Schweitzer said when she said she looks into her microscope. She said, I don't bring my faith into my microscope. It's all about the data. And the data are telling me a story, and I follow the truth. And so just this idea that we are just going to presuppose something based not on the Bible, but based on our interpretation of the Bible. Now we've really, but we're at a point where we have to ask you this question, and you handle it in your book. And the idea that how much of these things overlap, this idea of science and faith and this idea of our hermeneutic of the Bible or what the Bible is the Bible inspired by God, written by mortal men, or is the Bible written by God, whispered to mortal men? I mean, this idea of inerrancy. In your mind, Aaron, how much of this idea of inerrancy has played a role in people like what you're saying that have come to a conclusion and sift through the data to find confirmation bias?
That's a great question. And, to be honest, that's still one I struggle with. I mean, it's been, 16 years since I've been a Christian. It's been, I don't know, maybe over 10 years since I've, accepted evolution. And I still deal with that. One quote that comes to mind is from John Calvin. He says, God is wont to whisper to us like a nurse lisps to an infant. And I think about that with the Bible. I think it's a categorical mistake to try to look to, Genesis 1 through 3 for, literal scientific information. I mean, obviously the style it's written, you can tell it's not like a police report or just kind of a disinterested retelling of the facts. This seems like a much different genre of literature. I mean, there are genres of literature in the Bible where they talk about the creation of the Temple of Solomon, and they talk about every detail. They talk about how many windows there were and how many decorations there were. But when it comes to the creation of the entire universe and all plant and animal life, we get measly 2 chapters. And I think it's a categorical mistake to try to say, well, they were really trying to communicate scientific truths. I don't think that's what they were interested in communicating. I think there are some primitive, maybe scientific beliefs that are being communicated. But it is a difficult question. I mean, how do you reconcile biblical inerrancy, that being the Bible is true and everything it teaches, with this idea that Genesis 1 through 2 seems to, at least on the surface, try to be communicating this idea of a very recent Earth and, animals coming about through, creatio ex nihilo or something like that. That's an issue I haven't really fully resolved yet. It's tough because I think what really makes it tough is the issue of, I think, human evolution and the idea of, literal Adam and Eve or not. Because the New Testament does seem to, there's, when Paul talks about Adam in the New Testament, you do get the sense that Paul is talking about Adam as though he was a real flesh and blood person. And so, it's kind of a semantics game at that point saying, well, Paul maybe didn't really think he was a real person, or Paul thought he was a real person, but God was okay allowing Paul to think that, and that was kind of a cultural idea that God kind of co-opted to teach this larger idea of, Christ. And so at that point, you're kind of doing a semantics game, like, well, how much can I redefine inerrancy and not lose it? Because the evidence shows that there was not a single human pair at any time in recent history. I know some people have tried to make that work. Like I know Dr. Venema's done some work in that area. But, to be frank, it seems unlikely that we're going to find a primordial human pair that are the progenitors of the entire human race. I'm still working on how do I work that into my framework of biblical inerrancy? Because, of course, I do want to maintain biblical inerrancy as much as I can. But, at the end of the day, sometimes I have to suspend judgment. Sometimes I don't know, and I'm still researching.
I like what Dennis Lamoureux says about, in his most recent book, Ancient Science in the Bible, or the Bible and Ancient Science. And he talks about inerrant spiritual truths that are housed in ancient science as the vessel through which they're communicated, where it is the spiritual truths that are inerrant and enduring, even though the time and the date and the language, even the if it was Hebrew or Greek or Aramaic or whatever, their understanding of nature wasn't complete and correct, but the truths that were communicated remain true.
Yeah.
So I'd encourage checking out that book. It's I thought he did a really good job unpacking those specific ideas.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, when I read Genesis, I get the idea that, he's speaking to these, people who were in captivity from the Babylonians and had all these other gods. And, I get the sense he's saying, here's some basic truths. Like, I did create everything, no matter, what the process or, the laws, whatever. Like, I'm responsible for everything you see. I do sustain it. There's only one God, there's me. And so I can see some merit to that viewpoint. I think there are some, truths, scientific truths in the Old Testament and in Genesis, but yeah, to try to be like a concordist, kind of the style of what's his name? You just mentioned him.
Ken Hammer.
Hugh Ross?
Hugh Ross, yeah. It kind of the style of concordism where you have to find some kind of, modern scientific explanation for everything in the Old Testament. I don't think that's wise theologically or scientifically. We should just let the Bible speak for itself. And I think that's a different genre where they're not super interested in other truth, more spiritual ones.
When I first was grappling with these issues and I saw the Ankerberg debates between Ham and Hugh Ross, I really thought that was the argument, young Earth versus old Earth. And then when I finally realized this, what you just used the word concordist. When I finally realized that the argument really isn't about the word yam, but what to make of the word firmament, right? Because if the firmament was this kind of, Jim Carrey like glass dome, we have a problem, Houston, and we're probably reading it wrong. And so, but you're kind of presented with that view that it's like Ken Ham against Hugh Ross. And I didn't really know that concordism is really, maybe the Bible isn't teaching science here, and maybe we can't find modern science in this ancient text. Yeah. And that was kind of mind blowing to me and helped me, I think, get back to the theology that it's teaching. I think we just completely miss the theology when we're looking for science there or history. We end up missing the theology, but the concordist argument was big for me. I think I first really got a good definition of that from Lauren and Deb Harzma's book Origins. And that was very helpful because ultimately old Earth and young Earth creation aren't arguing about the text; they're arguing about the calendar. One has a really long calendar and one has a short calendar. They agree about everything else pretty much, and so except the demeanor of the two gentlemen is very different too. Hugh Ross is a fine man, and as Kristine likes to say, oftentimes old Earth creation or progressive creation is a stepping stone out of the madness of young Earth creation, and I get that, and I appreciate it for that. But at some point, you mentioned fossils and you mentioned the chimpanzee, the chromosomes, and how they deal with that. It's like they hide from that. I mean, reasons to believe is worse than answers in Genesis when it comes to hominids, because they don't want to accept any hominids, right? Because of their understanding of what Imago Dei is, being made in the image of God. And so it's really troubling because it's kind of stealing from one of God's books to buoy up the other one. If you truly believe that God both spoke the world and the word into reality, then why are you willing to allow that the book of nature to be just pillaged to support your interpretation of a word or even 11 chapters in Genesis? I don't know if that wasn't a question, but I'll let you comment on it if you'd like to, Aaron or Kristine.
That's a great observation. I mean, it makes me laugh. When I think about some of those powerful evidence of, common ancestry, think about like endogenous retroviruses. So, these are viruses that, if they make their way into either egg or sperm, they're passed on and become part of our genome. So humans have about 203,000 retroviruses. And with chimps, we share every single one of them except, I believe, 86. So 99.96% of our endogenous retroviruses we share with chimpanzees. So we're talking the same virus in the same region of our genome. It's almost impossible to explain apart from common descent. You think, what could the rebuttal possibly be from the intelligent design camp? And of course there is one. So I look it up, and it's this paper written by the Discovery Institute, and it's like 20 pages long. And as someone with 6 degrees, I'm working on my 7th. At the PhD level, I could barely understand this paper that the Intelligent Design Institute put out. And so finally, I read the paper a couple of times, and I realize what they're saying is, well, endogenous retroviruses tend to gravitate towards certain regions of the genome, which doesn't solve the problem at all because, certain region, but not the exact same spot we find in humans and chimps. And not only that, but then that undercuts their other argument that humans and chimps are not similar genetically, that we're very different genetically. You tell them, well, humans and chimps in their protein coding regions share 99.6% of their DNA. They say, well, that's not true. Well, we share 80% of our DNA with yeast. But then when they talk about endogenous retroviruses, they want to say, well, the fact that humans and chimps are so similar genetically allows parallel integration 2,899 endogenous retroviruses just happened to land in the same exact spot in our genome, same exact virus. It just happened to be. And what I realized what they're doing is, if I, as a PhD level scientist, can't understand a paper except by reading it 3 times, I know what they're doing, because I've had friends that tell me, oh, well, they've dealt with this. I read the paper. What they did was they looked at the paper. They saw there were giant $20 words they don't understand, tons of jargon. And they thought, well, these people sound really smart. I can't understand it. They must have some really good reason for rejecting the evidence on endogenous retroviruses. I guess there's nothing to see here. Move on. And to me, it just smells of purposeful obfuscation and, trying to just give people a snow job and just throw a bunch of jargon and fancy words at them, making them think there's some kind of plausible deniability when it comes to endogenous retroviruses. Which, someone who understands it like me, I understand that they're not really saying anything novel. This isn't a knockdown argument. They're not really adding anything to the discussion to, refute. They're not even engaging with the evidence or refuting it.
Now, for me, the thing that bothers me the most is the dishonesty, right? Why would it be necessary? Why would you even want to support Christianity by being dishonest?
I think I have an answer for you. I think I have an answer for you, and part of it is psychological, in that even when they interview men on death row, they find out that we are always the hero of our own narrative, right? I mean, we are always there's always a justification even for heinous acts. And Kristine, what I think they see this as a war, between good and evil. And as Winston Churchill spoke of the deceit that the Allies perpetrated during World War II, it was a greater good. We were using this deceit to overthrow something that is intrinsically wicked. And so it's okay. It's even honorable, right? I mean, we should even get medals for this kind of stuff. I think that's the only way they could deal with it, because it is obvious at the higher levels, not the typical person you talk to on a Facebook site who reads intelligent design stuff, but the guys at the higher level, they know. I mean, they know how compelling this evidence is, and yet I think they're convinced that biological evolution is the same as cultural Marxism, and it's going to lead to more abortion and more gay sex and more whatever they quantify as bad. And so they're going to fight it. I see a lot of people in the Christian culture war movement quoting the Old Testament. And that's my Bella. Okay, Bella. Bella. That's Bella's way of saying amen, or make it, or stop talking. But in their mind, they're not Jesus. Leaning down with the basin of water, washing your enemy's feet. They're Elijah smiting the prophets of Baal. So in their mind, they're doing the Jericho march. We're marching around the secular city 7 times, blowing our shofar. So to them, they've justified this attitude, but it's getting further and further away from Jesus. And as you said, further and further away from actual truth. And that's what's disappointing. But that's what's refreshing, forgive me, about your work, Aaron, and others like you, because there are younger kids that can sniff this out. Yeah, there are young people can sniff this out. And this is going to crush their faith eventually when they, like right before them, really thought that these people were being honest and that they were good defenses, and that, the secularists can't handle this. And, people actually believe that they don't want to debate Stephen Meyer because they're going to lose to Stephen Meyer. And, so I do think that this is a huge problem within Christianity. And I have to say this to you, Aaron, as a challenge. The skeptics who are watching the show are saying, why are you trying to make sense of it? with the Bible or with inerrancy? Why aren't you just doing the adult thing and walking away from it? So let me ask you the tough question here. If you see so much obfuscation with people who claim the name of Jesus, and I know they're fellow believers, I'm not questioning their identity in Christ, but when you see, for example, going back to the first division between science and faith, going back to astronomy, half a millennia ago, when Christians dug their feet in and on geocentricity and fought for 200 years the evidence of the telescope. And now you see them doing the same thing and making Darwin, the fourth member of the triunity of evil. How do you square that with the indwelling of the Holy Spirit and the leading of the Holy Spirit and having the mind of Christ and having all the advantages as a spiritual man that the natural man doesn't have? And how do you say to our unbelieving peers who trust the science and who might trust God's book of nature more than Christians do? How do you square that? How do you square such error when it comes to the natural world and even the theological world and all the different divisions in it?
That's a great question. I'll try to parse that out by, saying first, the great thing about science for me is that, it has certain limitations and it has a certain scope. It is a project of what it's trying to do. And so science is great at, making things like, computers in our pocket and planes and, artificial hearts. Science is great. But science at the end of the day, it can't tell us the things we really want to know. Is there an afterlife? Is there a God? Are there such things as objective morals, things we ought and ought not to do? As a scientist and someone who has faith, it's just a different tool for, different questions. People crack me up. There are people I've encountered in my scientific career who, say, well, if it's not empirically verifiable, then I just, out of hand reject it. I don't even consider it, which is just absurd. To try to use science as a be-all, end-all to detect if there's an afterlife, if there's a God. It's like, a metal detector. A metal detector is great at detecting metal, but it's not going to work if you're looking for, earth or grass. So trying to use science to answer some of these, religious or philosophical questions, it's like taking a metal detector to grass and, it then beeps and it's like, oh, then here. It's like, well, yeah, there's no metal, of course, because that's what it's designed to detect is metal, but there's earth, there's plants. And so, it's, for me, I guess trying to get to the original question. The original question being...
Let me ask you about that, because you brought up something about that you're saying, and I understand that there are a few scientists like Dawkins and others who would make that claim. Peter Atkins and others who just rely completely on materialism. But what about the more vulnerable types? Like, let's take, for instance, Carl Sagan. And Carl Sagan writes Contact, and in the movie version, at least, there's that famous scene where Matthew McConaughey is talking to Jodie Foster, and she is giving that materials viewpoint. If she can't test it and measure it and weigh it, she doesn't believe in it. And he asks her the question, well, did you love your dad? And she said, of course. And he said, prove it. And so this is Carl Sagan writing that. And if somebody like Carl Sagan can show that vulnerability, that science can't answer everything or prove everything, especially there were other moments in that book that did the same thing. If they're being vulnerable, who's going to be more, what's going to be more receptive to the young kid who's looking for truth, who's looking for somebody who's not scared of the truth? And he sees Jordan Peterson saying, I don't know, on the intellectual dark web. But then on our side, he's seen Frank Turek saying, not only do I know, but I know everything. Get in line and I'll give you answers to everything you're asking me.
In 1 minute.
In 1 minute. Yeah. So, what is out of joint about our Christian witness that we have to give every man every answer? And some of them are really bad answers.
That's a great point. Yeah, I mean, I laugh at, people like, oh, Bible answer man. Like you said, call in and I'll give you the answer on anything in 1 minute. It's like, this guy doesn't have any specialized training in, philosophy or history or, science, but, you call in and in 1 minute, he'll tell you the exact answer. Yeah, I guess for me, comes to humility and just, honesty. I mean, yeah, I would caution anybody, a pastor, an apologist, anybody who, is not really dug into this, type of literature, anybody who's not completely certain, just, definitely don't condemn it. And at the least, maybe just not voice your opinion. If you don't have something substantive to say, if you haven't really researched, if you haven't done your homework, then, you probably shouldn't be talking about it. Yeah, I do find the lack of openness and the lack of humility to be disturbing because, I do hear apologists that are so confident, talking about, the Cambrian explosion or, talking about flagellar motors and things like that. And, I can tell that they're just pontificating. It's like they have a brief and they're just reading off it. And that is something that you do see on the secular side, at least in my experience in academia. You do see a willingness to, explore at least any kind of scientific hypothesis. People are willing to engage in it and, just kind of dispassionately dialogue about it. I wish there was more of that philosophical mindset where, I've had a little bit of formal coursework in philosophy and it's, it's kind of my hobby horse. And, philosophy, there's no bad question. There's no wrong question. There's no evil question. You can ask any question about God, about man, about existence. There's no out of bounds. You can safely ask anything and you can just dispassionately discuss it rationally. And I do find sometimes in Christian circles, like you said, like there is an out of bounds, like we have to hold firm on this and, this is the answer and you kind of have to toe the line. And, it is upsetting to me that there's kind of a lack of humility saying, well, like I have a philosophy and theology PhD, but, I'm not an evolutionary biologist. Because, someone like William Lane Craig, I've actually emailed him multiple times, spilled a lot of, ink, trying to correct some of the things he said. And to his credit, he has looked into it and addressed some of it and corrected some of it in his podcasts. But, I've sent Lee Strobel multiple copies of my book. I've sent it to his office. I sent it to his home. And, most people I've sent copies of my book, it's like they're just not even interested in engaging with it. It's like they have what they want. They kind of, like you said, they sell lots of books using it, and that's just kind of it. When I like Abdu Murray, I like Abdu Murray. I knew him before he was the RZIM North American director. Well, not really knew him well, but I knew of him and talked to him. But when he gave a Skeptics Night talk at my church, I kept writing down these things like, he's misinformed about this, he's misinformed about that. Like, and I thought, naively, well, afterwards I'll just talk to him and I'll set the record straight. Like, he's a lawyer, he's a lawyer and apologist. He's not an evolutionary biologist. Like, let me just inform him. And so, of course, you can guess how that went afterwards. I'm bringing these things up and he's just digging his heels in. Like, no. Like, there were no animals before the Cambrian. No. Like, all the animals came into existence at the Cambrian. And I'm like, I'm starting to realize that he's not really open to exploring this or changing his mind or considering the evidence. It's like he read the Stephen C. Meyer book. He got the answer that I guess is the right answer. And, he's just kind of over it. Like, he's just going to dig his heels in and defend, like, the answer that he's supposed to give, which is kind of eye-opening and disappointing to me.
Which is why I think a lot of Christian apologetics has no real interest in persuading anybody, but confirming a group that's already persuaded. And so
throwing red meat to the crowd.
Yeah, I think this is what's so disturbing. And that's why when I see young people who are interested or curious about Christianity, and they can tell, I mean, they can tell that Joe Rogan has more sincerity and authenticity than the voices of Christianity that we've been bringing up here, because they're so insecure when you have to have an answer for everything and you never say, I don't know, or let me think about that, or that's it. When you can't concede anything. And look, this idea that the atheists are always wrong, actually, no, the atheists are right an awful lot about certain things. And to not make any concessions, it tells people that are on the fence or that are skeptical, why are these guys so insecure? And, coming from a scientific perspective, like you said, a kid who weighs the evidence psychologically and in the weight of evidence, this is putting yourself at a huge disadvantage even before they even look at even before they're even presented with any evidence. And so what do you have any insight or ideas as to, Kristine brought up that this is really not just from the pulpit level, but possibly even the seminary level, and pastors in the pulpit. As a pastor of 20 years, I can tell you that my peers, we were some of the biggest cowards in the world, because anything that might affect giving or attendance, that's the third rail. Let's not talk about it, so what is the solution here when you're looking at a problem that is seminary level, training our pastors, the pastors get into the pulpit and they take questions as a lack of faith and not as intellectual curiosity. And our kids grow up in that environment and they go to university like you did and see just a wonderful place where they can ask anything and they're treated like an adult and not like some disobedient, pagan demon or something. And how do we hope to have a better tomorrow as in a Christian witness? What do you have any? I mean, you wrote a book. I mean, obviously that's a solution. You want people to read your book, but do you?
It's really good.
Would you make any other recommendations as to how we can overcome this kind of blindness? Dennis Lamro, Kristine mentioned earlier. Dennis Lamro said it might take generations to overcome this. Are you as pessimistic as Dennis, or do you have any insight into that?
I am optimistic. I think about, I don't remember who said the quote, but, someone said, Christianity does it best when exposed to the air, when exposed to the fresh air. I think that's true. I think, loving God with all our minds, I think means really engaging with difficult questions, even scary questions. And so I think part of the solution is, cultivating a Christian culture that's not as much motivated by fear as in, if evolution, were to be true, I don't know what I would do that would shake up my worldview. I wouldn't know what to do about inerrancy. I know for me, that was a big motivator why I didn't dig further than I did past, Apologist, is because I was afraid of what I might find. Every time someone talked about evolution, I get that kind of knot in my stomach and I just didn't want to talk about it. And so I just kind of regurgitate what I had read. And so I think going from a culture of fear, where you do apologetics, you teach curricula, you teach, sermons out of fear, to going to, kind of that model of loving God with all your mind and engaging with any question. I'd hope that we can talk about anything, sexuality, abortion, science. I don't think there should be any limits. But, I think I think part of that is, like you touched on humility. I mean, I'm not ever going to give a lecture on aerospace engineering because, I don't know enough about it to intelligently talk about it. I can read a couple books and maybe read a Wikipedia article, but obviously compared to you, I don't have any business talking about aerospace engineering. And, obviously I understand like the office of the pastor, you do have to field questions on Genesis and human origins. But, I've had lots of pastors in my life that, are very humble, some of them bees, and they just say, well, I really am not that qualified to talk about it. These are some ideas. These are some things I've read. Here's some resources. But, like you're talking about that openness, like Joe Rogan's willing to talk about anything with anybody. He doesn't shut people out. He doesn't say, oh, well, you're not welcome. We can't talk about that. I think that's part of his appeal. And I hear my undergrad researchers talk about him all the time. And so I checked him out. I was like, what is the deal with this guy? And it is refreshing because, like you said, he doesn't have this, he doesn't have kind of the blinders on where you can't go here or here. He's willing to sit down and talk with anybody about anything. Not that we can't have convictions, but it's in kind of that openness, that marketplace of ideas, which, like you said, I mean, the university is supposed to be the pinnacle, like having unity out of this diversity of all these different ideas that you can evaluate and discuss and, weigh, come to a decision. And I don't know if a lot of that is born out of, kind of this fundamentalist kind of retreat, out of culture into like private Christian universities. I don't know if it was the Scopes monkey trial in 1925 where, the teacher got convicted of teaching evolution. It was later appealed. But it does seem like, there's been a retreat of mainstream Christian culture, or at least devout, biblical mainstream Christian culture, like into kind of the closet of academia. Having this insular society, this echo chamber of, this is what we believe about evolution. And, I think part of the solution is, again, like loving God with all our minds and having more of this philosophical kind of university disposition where, you can weigh these ideas and you can discuss them without fear, of being called a heretic. Which if you read the Amazon reviews on my book, I've been called a heretic plenty of times. I'm a fake Christian or I'm, whatever. But yeah, I think an environment where we can just, discuss these ideas without fear of being judged or, being called a heretic. I think that's an important part. But I guess, circling back to your original question, I'm optimistic because, as far as I understand, it seems like there is a renaissance going on in, academia's, as far as some specific fields like philosophy. It seems like there are many more Christians in philosophy than there were, 30, 50 years ago. And I think philosophy, at least for me, is a gateway to a lot of these other things like, science, and, textual criticism, whatever. So I think there is a renaissance going on. Like you mentioned, there's a lot more resources than there were even when I was looking at it. There's Biologist now. There's a lot of people writing on this topic. So I'm hopeful, but I think, like you said, it may take a generation or two, but I'm optimistic.
I don't know. I see too, though, right now with this pandemic and COVID and masks and the church, and maybe I'm talking about my church, but I know mine isn't alone. The lack of being willing to talk about the tough science topics has left a vacuum in how to talk about science and how to evaluate when the CDC recommends wearing masks. Why should we do that, right? Why not? And there's just this distrust of scientists and a feeling by some members of our congregation that this is government oppression on Christianity. And I feel like this vacuum where we haven't been talking about science and faith and how to evaluate quality resources. As an aerospace engineer, I'm definitely not qualified to talk about evolution. But I would point people to resources and mention, okay, so 99% of biologists affirm evolution. Maybe we should pay attention to what they're saying. And I feel like we don't have a voice in our congregations, or at least not in mine, that's saying, let's listen to those who have studied, who are experts in these fields, and hear what they have to say. Yeah, I guess there's not really a question there, but what do you think is the consequence of avoiding talking about science or allowing the pseudoscience voices to have the attention?
Yeah. No, that's important. And yeah, it has, obviously, as you can see with COVID, some real life implications. They can. I mean, even when I'm teaching my evolutionary biology class, I tell people, you don't have to believe me. That's fine. If you don't believe me, we can still be friends. That's totally cool. But, do your own homework. Don't believe me. Look at some references. Go to, some reputable resources like universities. Check this yourself. Well, and you see in my book, I have like 600 references. I mean, almost everything is footnoted. So I try to follow the same philosophy with my book. Don't believe me. If you don't believe me, check the resources out for yourself, inform yourself, and make a good decision based on that. I guess it's hard, though, because, even at my level, if I read something kind of outside my wheelhouse, like I was reading some papers on COVID yesterday, sometimes it's even hard for me to understand a paper that's not in my narrow field of expertise. So that is a challenge, because if I can't figure it out, then, how does the general public with, I think our science education is 28th in the world, in the developed world. So science education in the U.S. is not, that great to begin with. So judge information like, wearing masks, social distancing, stuff like that.
One of the things I know from my congregation is there's a huge surge in homeschooling this year, partly because of COVID and the unusual situations of is your school hybrid or online, and the hours and how do you work around that or whatever. And I see homeschooling as a good choice for a number of families, but I also have just some heartache that there's going to be a number of families with the best of intentions who want to honor God and teach their children about Jesus and about how God is the creator, who will inadvertently choose curriculum that presents a lot of misinformation. Do you have recommendations for families who are homeschooling on how to do a good job of choosing science curriculum? Do you have recommendations for any particular science curriculum? We spoke with Christy Hemphill a little bit ago, and she talked about the Biologist integrate, but that's more of a high school level. What about families with young children?
Yeah, I've heard and read about some doozies and some of the homeschool curricula, like, talking about things like, the Loch Ness Monster being evidence of, dinosaurs recently being on the earth. And there's some real whoppers. And I think, oh my goodness, like mainstream secular education at the public school level is bad enough when it comes to science. This takes it to a whole new level. That's a difficult one. My wife and I plan to homeschool, and so we haven't really thought too deeply about it. I was going to mention Biologist because I know they do have some resources, but that does seem to be geared towards kind of an older audience. I would hope. I know, parenting. If you're a homeschool parent, you probably don't have a lot of extra time, and it's probably easier just to buy some prepackaged curriculum rather than make it your own. But I would hope that, if parents are, taking this seriously and they think it's a topic that's worthy of real consideration and some real thought, I'd hope they take the initiative on their own, maybe to pick up, an undergraduate textbook in evolutionary biology, kind of figure out what they believe in, maybe gear some of the resources, or, teach their children some of the resources that they've found to be, trustworthy. Even in my class, I assigned some videos off YouTube, and I watched them first to make sure they're credible and reliable. But I think there are a number of secular resources that can be taken advantage of, and sometimes they may have something that is, materialistic, or maybe even slightly, anti-religious. But I plan on using that as a teaching moment. I plan on, talking with my daughter, my son about, well, this is the claim, what is the evidence for that claim? Why don't we accept that? What do we believe that's different? What can you think of? So I plan on using that hopefully as a teaching moment because, like we've all talked about, people, they're going to encounter this in the wild at some point. They're only going to be homeschooled for so long, and then they're going to figure out there's other people, and they're going to get out into the world and go to school. So I don't want to, raise my kids in this, bubble where, we always have the answers and, there's no opposition. I'm not entirely sure about resources for homeschool, but, as I plan to teach my daughter about it, I plan to, I guess use a lot of multimedia like YouTube, Biologist, and I guess it's a little harder than just having a prepackaged curriculum, but I guess I plan on doing it piecemeal.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of advice would you offer to youth pastors or youth leaders for how to talk with students about science and faith in like small group settings or in youth group?
Yeah, I guess the number one thing I would say is
just reading your book.
Yeah, that'd be a great way, but maybe not. It's kind of long. It's funny. I think I've had one person that knows me that's ever read the entire book. And like all my friends, all my family, I think they've gotten like 10 pages in, and it's just propping up a kitchen table or lining a bird cage somewhere. But yeah, aside from reading my book, I think first anybody who's teaching on, topics of, human origins or the age of the earth, they should really take a big, spoonful of, caution and humility. I would say that my biggest advice is just, don't overextend yourself. It's definitely okay to say, I don't know. I mean, I said earlier, when it comes to, Adam and Eve, when it comes to, Genesis 1-3, I really don't know on some of that, and I may never know. I'm still looking into it, but I don't know. So I guess that willingness to admit that this is something outside your area of expertise, and definitely caution against making, really bold, well, this is false, this is true, we don't believe this. But yeah, I can appreciate how that's tough as a pastor because, kids want to know, they want a concrete answer. They're probably not going to be happy with some kind of hand wavy, like, well, I'm not really sure, there's different schools of thought. But, I wish at earlier in age, there would have been more honesty and humility and more openness about it, and not just, this is what it is, don't worry about what they say. I had a close personal friend. He actually teaches the kids at his church, and he came to me one day. We were working together, and he said, I talked to the kids about evolution the other night. I was like, oh, really? I was like, what did you say to them? He's like, oh, I told them, they have some kind of supposed evidence and things like that, but it's really nothing to worry about. They don't really have anything. It's not true. I was like, dude, you're a history major. You don't know anything about evolution or biology. You just set these kids up for a crisis of faith at some point in their life. And I know because, that was me. I mean, that's partially who I wrote for. It was people who have been, fed this, oh, there's nothing to it. Don't worry about it. Nothing to see here. Just keep moving along. And then, you go to the university level and you realize, wait, I've been fed a line this whole time. I've been sold a bill of goods. They didn't tell me about this. They, misconstrued this. And so I wrote it for, partially for, those kids who, are one day going to, go to, the university, and they're going to encounter the evidence themselves, and they're going to have a crisis of faith because they were set up for it from the beginning.
One of the things that, you mentioned, how to handle it with kids. I encourage people to, if it was me, I'd say, this is what I am seeing here. I always start with what to me is obvious or what I know, although I say this is what I see. And then I say, but these are the questions I still have, right? So I kind of encourage in my teaching of my children or of younger children this idea that good questions are better than pat answers. And so we want them to explore the questions and come to their own conclusions, in a sensible way. And not to be afraid of questions. And I think when they see that an adult still has questions, it's actually a good thing for them. Like you said, you're still wrestling with things. And I think if you share that with people, they respect that. My father was a pastor too. And one of the biggest moments of influence on me when I brought up a question to him on a passage in Ephesians, and he didn't answer for a second. And then he said, I don't know. That's a great question. Let me think about it. So, here I was in the 5th grade, and I thought, wow. And it made me marvel, not my own intellect, but that my father was humble enough to say, I hadn't considered that. Let me think about it. But that's not a typical reflex of most Christians. We have to have the right answer. And if we don't have it, we'll buy the book that says 200 right answers to difficult questions by one of those gentlemen you mentioned earlier. And we'll memorize what the answer was. My father used to say that Christians oftentimes wander around looking to see whom they can plug their umbilical cord into. And I think a lot of people do that with William Lane Craig. They let him do their thinking for them because he's smart, So, or with Stephen Meyer's book. And you said with the jargon and the rhetoric. But I really do think that we need to get to the place where we teach that it's okay to still have questions, and actually good questions show that you're thinking about it intellectually and not just emotionally.
Yeah.
I think that ties in a lot too with teaching that the Bible is living and active, and not just a little kid's story that you can all learn by the time you're 8, and then there's nothing else to explore and learn. I mean, the Bible has so much more depth and so much more wisdom that we have to continue to keep growing into it. It's not some little children's fairy tale story that just has a single, story arc, and then that's it, and there's nothing more to learn. Helping our kids see that there's so much depth, that even after a lifetime of studying, there's more to learn.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, it seems to me like the higher up you get, as far as like education, like the more you see people who are willing to say like, I don't know, which is interesting. In grade school, it's like, you ask a question, they always have an answer. I was surprised when I got to university. A lot of times someone asks the professor a question, I don't know. Isn't this your expertise area? Like, isn't this your field? Yeah, but I don't know. And so I think that idea of, humility and being willing to admit you don't know, I think that's huge. I would imagine that carries a lot of weight with, teenagers and youth groups.
Yeah. Aaron, it's been a pleasure talking with you. Kristine, do you have more? Do you have anything else?
Well, actually, I'd turn it over to you, Aaron. Do you have anything else you'd like to say? Any final thoughts to share with our audience, or questions that you get often that we didn't touch on?
I'm just grateful to, be able to have a discussion with you all. And it's so great that people are engaged in this discussion. It makes me really happy because, initially, some of my frustration was that I didn't hear any voices out there. I didn't know there were any other voices out there. I felt like I was alone, and, I had a crisis of faith. I mean, I thought for, a little while I might have to give up this Jesus thing because obviously the evolution of biology, it seems true, and I've been told it can't coexist. So I'm so thankful that, now there's a plethora of voices, thoughtfully dialoguing about it. And that makes me happy and, gives me hope.
Aaron, Kristine called me, or it might have been texted me. I don't know. I get confused. Very excited about a book she had just read called Deliver Us from Evolution. Let me ask you, with Christmas approaching right now, who do you recommend for a gift of this as a stocking stuffer? Who's the type of audience that this book is going to reach and needs to reach?
Yeah, I think, I wrote it with several different audiences in mind. Even I wrote it in mind on Christians because I know, some people in my circle, in the academic biology circle, what is the big deal with all this? Why are Christians so uptight about this and, wrapped around the axle? And, I wrote my book partially to say, hey, this is a big deal with inside Christianity. It may not make sense from a secular standpoint, but I tried to write my book partially to help people in the secular world understand, what is this all about? Why are Christians so upset about it? I also wrote it for people who are disenfranchised. I've been at many churches where I feel disenfranchised myself. I'm a devout, Bible-believing Christian. And, the minute someone finds out you accept evolution, they're suspicious of you. It can be lonely. So I wrote that also for people, who are in the faith, who've accepted evolution, but don't feel like they have a place. I also wrote it for people, I'm trying to think. What was the third one? I had three of them. I lost my third train of thought.
Well, if it comes back to you, jump back in. I look at it, and I would like to suggest to parents who are upset that their kids have either left the faith or questioning the faith because they can't reconcile it with science. I would encourage you to read this book, and I'll tell you why. And it's the story of Stan Telking. Stan was a nominal Jewish man whose daughter came home from the university, and she came out of the closet as a Christian, which is heartbreaking to any good Jewish family. And Stan did what any loving father would do after he kvetched and moaned about it to everybody in his community. He bought a copy of the Bible, and he said he's going to look at the Bible and read it, and he's going to write down all these questions to bring to his rabbi because he's sure his daughter was wrong. And he read the book, and he wrote down the questions, and he went to his rabbi, and his rabbi didn't have good answers, and Stan Telking himself became a Christian. But the reason I'm bringing this up is he wrote a book called Betrayed. He felt betrayed by his daughter. He thought his daughter had betrayed not only the family, but the community and their Jewish ethnicity. But then he looked at what she saw, and he was willing to open his mind and his heart to the evidence, and he went where the evidence followed. So if you're upset, if you think your child has gone down a slippery slope, your child right now might be in the process of deconverting because they've been taught bad information about the faith and unnecessary information about the faith. And Aaron's book could actually be the safety net that allows them not to throw the baby away with the bathwater, and allows them to hold on to the essentials, the fundamentals, the mere Christianity that we all can celebrate around the Lord's table. So I would encourage you, if you're a parent who's frustrated with your atheist son who just came home from university, walk with them in their journey and be open to the information. At least inform yourself and read Aaron's book. So that's my pitch. But did it come back to you, Aaron?
I'm going to suggest an audience too. I'm going to suggest an audience of youth pastors and youth leaders. They need to know what's in this book too, so that when they're teaching their youth, they're not pulling out straw man arguments or dismissing evolution as, there's not really any evidence for it. I think our youth pastors and youth leaders need to know the strength of the evolutionary foundation and why it's so persuasive to biologists before they go off and make those arguments that aren't going to stand up when a student goes off to college and takes a course on biology. So I think that this is the book for pastors, youth leaders. Parents would fit in that same boat as well.
Yeah. I mean, that's another group. Also another group, like we were talking about before, is I just hope to remove barriers to faith. I guess is one thing I'm trying to do. Because, my best man at my wedding, my best friend is, he's an avowed atheist, at times even an anti-theist. And, I've asked him, would you ever, consider a worldview that thinks, baby dinosaurs were brought on the ark? And he said, absolutely not. He said, that's crazy. He said, do some Christians believe that? I was like, well, there's at least a Christian radio show talk show host that I have listened to that believes that. And other people believe that too, that, baby dinosaurs are on the ark.
And somewhere in Kentucky that believes that too, but yeah.
Yeah, right next to the incest was okay exhibit before God declared it not okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, some people, it's a no-go. Like this, the Christian worldview, sans evolution, they're thinking, I don't want to have faith in one pocket, my brain's in the other. Like, I don't want to have to check my brain at the door. And so, part of my book is I'm trying to remove barriers to faith, saying you don't have to check your brain at the door. You can still worship God, with all your heart, mind, and spirit. You can still pursue the book of nature, and you can also, pursue the written word, the book of life.
Yeah, I think the problem in a lot of American Christian or Western Christianity is that we believe that the gospel answer that Paul gave when he asked by the Philippian jailer, "What must I do to be saved?" was believe on the Lord Jesus Christ, and that the world was created in 6 24-hour days, and that T-Rex bunked with Noah on the ark, and in the right to keep and bear arms, and that life begins at conception, and that marriage is one man, one woman, and we mix in all this cultural stuff that may be good or may be bad into the actual pure gospel message, which Paul says is an anathema in another letter. And the answer was believe on the Lord Jesus Christ and thou shalt be saved. And you find out that there have been many people, from Billy Graham to C.S. Lewis, probably the two greatest apologists and evangelists of the 20th century, who had absolutely no problem with biological evolution. And so I think if your book is one of a number of resources that explains that to people who have this built-in animosity or suspicion of not just evolution, but really all of modern science, that it'll be a powerful witness and a powerful tool to remove those barriers. Aaron, thank you for joining us. We really enjoyed our talk with you, and we really hope that your book continues to bless people. I'll tell you this. We've had a lot of authors on the show, and I'm not just saying this, but Kristine has called me maybe 3 or 4 times about a book that she says, this is a great book. You've got to get it. And yours was among them. So, and a couple of times she said, the book was okay. I won't tell you which books that was, but she really loved your book. I just started reading it, so to be honest with you, I can't. I'm sure we think alike, so I'm sure I'm going to share her enthusiasm for it. But just scanning the table of contents, I'm very excited about it. So.
Okay, John, I can already tell you, you're going to like the discussion on intelligent design.
Oh, good. Yeah. That's one of the things. I'd like to do a whole show on intelligent design, and maybe we could have you back on a panel for that, Aaron, because I really think, cool. I've said this to Kristine before. If Young Earth Creation if we're at the Christian wedding reception and Young Earth Creation is the clown car with the big red nose and the long flappy feet, intelligent design gets out of the limousine in the 3-piece suit, and they're really decked out nice, and they're articulate. Yeah. And I think it's a greater even injustice because it's more people are more susceptible to hitching a ride onto the ID bandwagon because they use scientific terms and they're not bat crap crazy like these guys who think T-Rex was on the ark. So I do think that is a refuge for Christians who want to think they're scientific, and it's even more dangerous to Christian pride than something that is really almost as ridiculous as believing in a flat Earth. Even though there's a number. I mean, look at the influence though Ken Ham has. Look at the influence that AIG has. I mean. There's one of the last days at my church, an elderly man came up to me, and a big family in the church, and he came up to me and he put his hand on my arm and he said, "Pastor, have you been to the Ark Encounter yet?" And, I try not to openly cringe, but I was cringing. I said, "Yeah, I have not been there." And he started to nearly cry. And he said it was such a spiritual experience for me to go there and to see how enormous it was. And I there's certain battles you don't fight, and I just let him own that joy. And I thought to myself, you don't listen to my show at all, do you? But it was really troubling to see the hold that has on certain people. And it's not going to affect him, but his grandkids are going to walk away from the faith because of it, because it's just too far. It's a bridge too far. It's just it makes Christianity not even plausible, let alone probable, You said when you were 16, you thought it was the most probable argument, but it doesn't. Christianity is not even plausible, as you brought up with your best man, if you're going to make an argument like that the rocks are lying, that, to believe Young Earth Creation isn't just to reject Darwin or evolution. It's biology. It's to reject geology and paleontology and, climatology and just all of them, just embryology, plate tectonics. You have to reject all of that stuff. And DNA, the DNA evidence you brought up. But beyond that, you have to accept that we live in a conspiracy theory, that all the major scientists and all the major scientific fields are under the spell of the prince of the power of the air, and you're basically satanic sock puppets. and there are people who believe this. I've met them. They believe that. This distrust of science. It's the people who won't wear the masks, Kristine, because it's a hoax, and they want to, they want to get rid of the Bill of Rights next or something. And it really is. I know it's not the common experience of believers around the globe. Like N.T. Wright would say, he doesn't experience this in the UK, and some of our friends up north in Canada would say it's rare. But it is shocking that it's so prevalent here in our country. It just is shocking. But anyway, I'm going on too long. Kristine, you want to say some last words to Aaron?
No, just thank you so much for joining us today, Aaron. We're very pleased to have you on your show, and I really hope lots of people will get this book, because it's one of the best treatments of the subject that I've read, and I've read like about 100 books on this topic, so it's a really good one. And I thank you for your work on it. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Yeah. I try to leave no stone unturned. I'd read a lot of books that treat the scientific evidence in real depth, and I've read some books that treat like the philosophical, psychological, theological side really well. But I wanted to make a book that tried to tie both those things together. I mean, I was trying to put together, something that's pretty much the first half of the book is, kind of the theology, some of the psychology and the philosophy. And the second half is just raw, unadulterated evidence. And I think very persuasive evidence. I tried to put the best case forward. And, my hope is that, if anybody even thinks, that anybody's even stimulated to think about it, that my job's done. And I've seen that in some of the not nasty comments on my Amazon book page. Some people have said, I didn't accept evolution. I read this and I'm not really sure now. And I think that's great. Press into it, dig into it.
All right. Well, let's start with an icebreaker then. So what's the most amazing natural phenomenon you've ever seen?
Yeah, I think one of them probably has to be witnessing the salamander migration. In early spring, it's like usually the first warm, rainy night over 40 degrees, and it's just so cool to see all these Abystoma salamander species, spotted salamanders, tiger salamanders, just all kind of migrating in mass to these ponds to mate. And it's just cool knowing that there's like a road 100, 200 yards away, and there's this whole world out there. These salamanders mating and doing these things, and just largely unaware of it. This has been something that's going on probably for thousands of years in that region, and in other areas, pre-glaciation of the Midwest, for millions of years they've been doing these rituals, and it's cool to kind of peek a little bit and see these rituals that have been going on for so long that we're usually unaware of, but it's going on in our backyard.
That's a great
I mean, I was completely unaware of that myself. So that's very interesting. What areas does this occur? Like what parts of the world?
Yeah, so at least the Midwest here. So I lived in Michigan, East Michigan, and here in Northeast Ohio, there's an annual salamander with most of the species, doing that in the spring. But it's so cool. I mean, you're out there and you hear, wood frogs. It's just deafening, and chorus frogs, and these salamanders kind of migrating overland to go to the pond, and then the rest of the year there's kind of hiding under logs. So it's a really cool event, and almost nobody's ever out there. Nobody knows what's going on, but nature's kind of doing its thing for thousands of years.
Aaron, you look like a young man, and I hope if that's not the case, I'm not insulting you. But are you married with children?
Yeah, I'm actually. I look young. I guess that's good, but I'm 32, and I'm married. I've been married for almost 10 years, and I have a 2-year-old daughter, and I have a son that's going to be born in February.
Okay. So I'm glad your only escape from not saying that they're the most incredible phenomenon you'd ever seen is that you would say that they're a supernatural phenomenon, not a natural. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's something else. Yeah, they're out of this world, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, glad to hear it. The salamanders sound amazing. It just sounds out of this worldly. Yeah.
Well, and I can testify to the volume of frogs. We have a pond behind our house, and they are very loud. We can hear them in the house with the windows closed in certain times of year.
What's your answer, Kristine? What's your answer?
Oh, shoot. I mean, goodness, that's hard to pick. There's so many. Come back to me. Give me a moment to think about it.
It's easy for me. Maybe I just haven't been out of the house enough, but when I saw the Northern Lights, I had only seen them in pictures and stuff, and you always think they're photoshopped, this can't be real. But when you see them, they're so vivid. It's like you're in some kind of fantasy. It's like you're in a movie or something. And so I think the Northern Lights would be my most breathtaking moment. But
That's
the
cool.
Grand Canyon was another one. When I first saw the Grand Canyon, I tell people, we were in the kind of not the tram, but the little bus that takes you from the parking to the actual trailhead. And I wasn't expecting to see it until we got off the bus, but I looked to my left and I saw it, and my jaw dropped. The pictures don't prepare you just for actually seeing it live. And so I guess those two. Now, if I saw the Northern Lights over the Grand Canyon, that would be the answer, but I never have. So, yeah.
That might be a bit south. Yeah.
Yeah.
I might say something like the Garden of the Gods in Colorado. That's pretty amazing and magnificent, and the way those boulders just kind of seem like they're sitting and about to topple over. Such a beautiful landscape and area too. So
Nice.
That's as nice as the interview gets, Aaron. Now we're going to be mean.
Put me in the hot seat. I'm ready.
Yeah.